Okay, this is Federalist 29, Part 4. Publius says, if I were to talk to the federal legislature, this is what I would tell them regarding the militia. And we were in the middle of his talk, supposed talk, when we had to stop in the last video. So I'll start with the paragraph that says, but though the scheme of disciplining the whole nation must be abandoned as mischievous or impracticable, yet it is a matter of the utmost importance that a well-digested plan should, as soon as possible, be adopted for the proper establishment of the militia. The attention of the government ought particularly to be directed to the formation of a select corps of moderate extent upon such principles as will really fit them for service in case of need. By thus circumscribing the plan, it will be possible to have an excellent body of well-trained militia ready to take to the field whenever the defense of the state shall require it. This will not only lessen the call for military establishments, but if circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people, while there is a large body of the citizens, little, if at all, inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me the only substitute that can be devised for standing army and the best possible security against it if it should exist. So let's have a small professional army, and then let's have a good uniform training for all the militias of different states. And these militias, these citizen soldiers, when the time comes, when it's needed for them to defend the states that they're from, the country, then all of them have been trained well enough to work with the militia of the other states if need be, if an invasion takes place. So he says, this is the speech that I would give to the federal legislature. And he's doing this to make his critics understand why this plan, this constitution was devised, was written, was shaped the way it was. Thus, differently from the adversaries of the proposed constitution, should I reason on the same subject, deducing arguments of safety from the very sources which they represent as fraught with danger and perdition. But how the national legislature may reason on the point is a thing which neither they nor I can foresee. There is something so far-fetched and so extravagant in the idea of danger to the liberty from the militia that one is at a loss whether to treat it with gravity or with raillery, whether to consider it as a mere trial of skill, like the paradoxes of rhetoricians, as a disingenuous artifice to instill prejudices at any price, or as the serious offspring of political fanaticism. Where in the name of common sense are our fears to end if we may not trust our sons, our brothers, our neighbors, our fellow citizens? What shadow of danger can there be from men who are daily mingling with the rest of their countrymen and who participate with them in the same feelings, sentiments, habits, and interests? What reasonable cause of apprehension can be inferred from a power in the Union to prescribe regulations for the militia and to command its services when necessary, while the particular states are to have the sole and exclusive appointment of the officers. If it were possible seriously to indulge a jealousy of the militia upon any conceivable establishment under the federal government, the circumstance of the officers being in the appointment of the states ought at once to extinguish it. There can be no doubt that this circumstance will always secure to them a preponderating influence over the militia. In reading many of the publications against the Constitution, a man is apt to imagine that he is perusing some ill-written tale or romance, which instead of natural and agreeable images, exhibits to mind nothing but frightful and distorted shapes. Gorgons, hydras, and chimeras, dire, discoloring and disfiguring whatever it represents, and transforming everything it touches into a monster. Like I said in the first part of this Federalist, he's very defensive. His language is he's mad at these critics. He says, how dare you? Are you all crazy? Have you gone crazy to say that we think that your sons and husbands who are going to be in militia force are going to be put to use by federal government and go to other states and oppress the other citizens of America? He says that's crazy, because majority of the people in America will not do that. So he says, see how crazy these critics are, these anti-federalists are, that are writing articles in the papers and criticizing things that are not even conceivable, that you can't even think about it. He says Americans are not going to go to other states and oppress other people. The only time we will put the militia to use, and by the way, these militias are the same people that are going to be officered by people of your choosing. Remember, it says, the Constitution says that the officers for these militia units will be appointed by the state. So he says, officers that are from your states are not going to take your sons and husbands to another state, or to even to your own state, to your own people, and oppress them and take away their freedoms. So this language is he's mad. A sample of this is to be observed in the exaggerated and improbable suggestions which have taken place respecting power of calling for the services of militia. That of New Hampshire is to be marched to Georgia, of Georgia to New Hampshire, of New York to Kentucky, and of Kentucky to Lake Champlain. I know the picture is a little blurry, but he says, you're crazy to think that militias from Georgia are going to all the way up here to New Hampshire, and vice versa. New Hampshire militias come down here to oppress people of Georgia, or people from Kentucky region. Kentucky is not a state yet, but remember I said this area of Virginia is called Kentucky Territory, which becomes a state. People of this area that are going to go to New Hampshire or New York and harass those people, or vice versa. He says this is not going to happen. American people are not going to do that. And I told you about the distances. You're not talking about traveling with plane or train or anything like that. You're talking distances that takes weeks to get there. Continue reading. Nay, the debts due to the French and Dutch are to be paid in militiamen instead of louis or ducats. At one moment there is to be a large army to lay prostrate the liberties of the people, in other words, to bring people's liberties to their knees, to crush them. He says, at one time you're telling us that we're going to use the army to take away your freedom, and then turn around and say you're going to use the militia to take away your freedom. It says the anti-federalists are not making sense. At another moment, the militia of Virginia are to be dragged from their homes 500 or 600 miles to tame the Republican contumacy of Massachusetts, and that of Massachusetts is to be transported an equal distance to subdue the refractory haughtiness of the aristocratic Virginians. Do the persons who rave at this rate imagine that their art or their eloquence can impose any conceits or absurdities upon the people of America for infallible truths? See, notice he says that people of Massachusetts are not going to go here to try to discipline these people. And then he says aristocrats. He's referring to the different cultural differences, which were big cultural differences between these states in the north, or what they used to call east, and these southern states that have a lot of slavery and plantations, because they lived an aristocratic lifestyle, based on slave labor and things like that. So he says, you tell somebody from up here to go down there to mess with them, they say, no, their way of life is totally different from us. Why should we go over there and try to change that? So he says you cannot easily fool the militias of one state to go 500 miles to crack down on people from another state. He says these militias are being trained only for use in times of emergency, in case we have an invasion or something like that.